China, Seoul. It's a delight to be back. Title of my presentation is Variable Bodies, No Self Towards a Socially Engaged Buddhist Theology of Disability. Recently, Chris Mounsey has proposed a shift in critical disability studies away from the Foucauldian emphasis on the notion of compulsory idealism toward a fuller emphasis on and appreciation of the individual embodied experience. Mounsey theorizes this approach under the concept of variability, same, only different, as a discursive replacement to the term disability. Mounsey's same, only different affords, without center and margin, any variable body the complete autonomy of an embodied presence, while leaving emphatic, unoppressive recognizability in sameness intact. A focus on the body can facilitate literature and history speaking to the presence, without the necessity of anachronistic categorizations and retrodiagnoses. This does not preclude or devalue the usefulness of diachronic phenomenological and philosophical meanderings, in particular, when the focus, limitations and parameters of such inquiries are clearly defined. With these caveats, I would like to open up a dialogue between contemporary critical disability theory with Buddhist thought. I aim to demonstrate how embodied and body oppressive normativities and the margins they produce can successfully be challenged through the lens of the conjunct Buddhist principles of interdependencies, cause and effect, and no self. In conclusion, I will attempt to point out some pathways to navigating variability-affirming anthroposcapes, landscapes of embodied human experience. Buddhist approaches to the body flow from two pivotal angles, soteriology and sociology. That means aspiration and conditioned socio-cultural reality. On the level of aspiration and soteriology, the Buddhist traditions approach bodies as fields of transformative virtue, while on the level of sociology, of socio-cultural realities, bodies are seen as limiting or expedient expressions of past actions and ripened conditions. Buddhist bodies are constructed within the parameter of Buddhist virtue ethics or virtuosity. However, variant embodied abilities, while linked to past actions, are not attributable to individualized non-virtue or virtue, since the Buddhist key tenet of no self precludes the judgmental attribution of causal agencies to an individual core, self or soul. Instead, phenomena in empiric persons manifest as karmic continuities without essentials identities attached. A particularly meaningful way to understand the framework of Buddhist intentional yet subjective essence-free karmatic theory arises as an exercise in deconstruction of essentialism by practice or performance in Butlerine terms. In this pedagogical reading of Buddhism, questions of ontologically essentialized selfhood and truth are rendered obsolete in favor of the soteriological pragmatics, experience-oriented andragogy, aiming only at showing methods to enduring happiness. In the famous Snake Simile Sutta of the Pali Canon's middle-length discourse, the Buddha, as interlocutor, proclaims, "I only teach suffering and its ending," end quote. This can be read as the Buddha saying that he does not concern himself with essentialized identities, with ontology, cosmology, and other conceptualizations of reality. Instead, the focus of his teachings is freedom from dukkha, pain, or unsatisfactoriness. The Buddhist concept of suffering includes the experience of pain within ever-changing fluid-conditioned reality, the pain of karmatic flux, and ensuing experience of lack during the constant change. The Buddhist notion of karma without individually essentialized agents and of rebirth without anyone who is reborn, hence, points to the experience of of our ever-changing spatial, temporal, and cosmic psycho-spiritual context as a continuity without ontological fixed identity, a flow without essence. In this reading of Buddhist philosophy, widening Butler's concept of performativity to the extreme, reality itself is performance. It can be argued that that form of a Buddhist point of view, body variances express genealogies or actualizations of generic human potentials rather than essentialized individual histories of virtue or non-virtue. This non-judgmental and its potential arguably dehegemonic Buddhist approach does not preclude the moralizing of unvirtuous or virtuous bodies in cautionary tales. Nor has it at the level of sociocultural organization and expression prevented Buddhists and Buddhisms from variability-based discriminatory practices, most importantly on the level of the monastic discipline. All extant and still valid and mostly enforced Buddhist monastic codes preclude applicants with physical and mental variabilities from ordination. For example, in the Theravada tradition, the Pali Canon section on monastic discipline, the Vinaya, congenitally and acquired impairment are physiomorally grouped together with those having received corporeal punishment, such as branding, scourging, marking as a robber, cutting off of hands, feet, ear, noses, fingers, thumbs, tendons, lumped together with congenital and acquired variabilities, such as webbed fingers, humpbacks, dwarfism, deformities, blindness, numbness, deafness, lameness, and other walking impairments, paralysis, and general medical problems, such as infirmity, bad health, contagious diseases, goiter, elephantiasis. The list is quite consistent across the 5 extant early Vinaya traditions. Equally, those seen as having non-normative sex/gender were and are prohibited from ordination. Ordination to the Buddhist monastic community was and is not governed by soteriology, but according to social context and societal paradigms. The code rules establish a physio-moral elite in-group which feels the need to guard itself from societal damage both by behavior and by association. However, Buddhist modernisms are challenging the elite group by privileging soteriology above sociology. Modernist lay movements, in particular in the global north, vocally advocate equality of virtuosi status for non-monastics. And in this context, it's relevant to keep in mind that the traditional monastic rules are indeed limited to the governance of a monastic elite. They cannot be argued to establish a universal ethical governance or code, which would be utilized to encouraging discrimination. In doctrinal terms, the imperative of universal compassion is absolute paramount in Buddhism, and explicitly includes outgroups and the marginalized. All variabilities within and without the normative boundaries are seen as manifestations of karma. Those physically and or socially afflicted by these manifestations are prominently deserving of love in action. In canonical stories, we can find that caring for a blind and old parent, end quote, is narratively constructed as a valid reason for refusing to become ordained. So happened in the case of the Potagati. And Buddhist rulers regularly are praised in the chronicles, the Vanshas, as sustaining institutions for the blind and sick and otherwise variable. It can be argued that what has opened up Buddhist traditions to discrimination of variabilities is the popular and unsophisticated utilization of karma theory in the form of attributing guilt and shame for past lives' actions. This form of moralizing ignores the intricacies of Buddhist psychologies of no selfhood and is based on cautionary explanations of karma abounding in Buddhist scriptures. In the Buddhist canonical text, karmatic foolishness equaling to non-virtuous behavior is directly linked to non-favorable physical variability. prominently in the Theravada Pali Canon in the discourse of the fool and the wise. The non-virtuous fool experiences and embodies aspects of his moral deficit as the following stock phrase list in the Pali Canon shows. He is ugly or inferior class, unsightly, deformed, blind, deformed, diseased, or blind, or crooked, or lame, or paralyzed. The list heading, termed Dubbanno of bad color, implies both aesthetical and social abjection. The description of a boy in the Avadana Shapakam drastically exemplifies this marriage of social abjection to the non-normative physicality. The youngster is here depicted as, quote, ugly, unsightly, deformed, his body smeared all over with pieces and foul-smelling. The Buddhist physio-moral discourse of the body includes abject class and non-normative sex, gender, and the inferior female birth. Any progress on the Buddhist path towards enlightenment is impeded by physio-moral problematic rebirth, as the Pali commentarial list of 18 impossible states shows. Within the early Sanskritic Buddhist tradition, such inopportune akshanaprapta birth is result of karma is described as, quote, he is born blind, stupid, dumb, and outcast, certainly not privileged, a notorious slanderer, a sex/gender deficient or deviant, a perpetual slave, a woman, a dog, a pig, a donkey, a camel, and a poisonous serpent. Another Mahayana discourse enumerates being, quote, blind, lame, without tongue, and deformed, end quote, among the karmic results of sense attachments of desire. And again, mental disabilities or learning difficulties and various animal rebirths are included in the shortly following summary of such physio-moral expressions of causality. With the self-referential cult of book emerging within Mahayana praxis, disregard for the scripture becomes another karmic cause for unvirtuous bodies. Quote, those who do not have faith in this discourse I dispense when they are born human again are then born idiots, lame, crooked, blind and dull. The Buddhist physio-moral encoding of corporealities through the doctrine of karma can be and is only resolved by the nirvanic soteriology. Such nirvanic or bodhi orientation projects a utopia of invariable bliss and translates this salvific impetus into the healing activities of enlightenment. Mahayana scriptures metaphorize the spiritual transformation of suffering as healing rays born out of the deep contemplative trance and fueled by the higher compassion of enlightened beings. For example, the influential Mahayana scripture Discourse of the Golden Light describes in the second chapter the healing contemplation rays emitted by the Bodhisattva Ruchiraketu. I think I have that here, yes. The salvific power of the Bodhisattvas is described in similar ways in the Ratnakar Dharani. Just skipping ahead a little bit. The enlightenment being salvific aspiration is founded upon the wish for universal happiness. Hence the confessional aspiration liturgies include the prayer that all varieties of suffering in sentient beings may cease. The popularity of the aspirational hope for those in disadvantaging variabilities is evidenced by the intertextual variation of key formulations found through Buddhist literatures. For example, Shantideva's Bodhicharyavatara concisely includes an only slight alteration to the central verse in the Suvarnaprabha Sutra's wishing prayer, when it quotes, "May the blind see and may the deaf hear always." What emerges from the discussion above are contradicting and idiosyncratic Buddhist approaches to embodied variance and impairment, which exemplify attempts to negotiate different hegemonic social regimes of biopower with soteriological universalism and inclusiveness. Buddhist modernisms, with their main modes of detraditionalization, demythologization, and psychologization, have found creative ways to propagate the demarginalization of the Buddhist unordainable. Within contemporary socially engaged Buddhism, karma is inventively rethought in terms of social justice and human rights advocacy. Buddhist disability activism appears to be comparably underdeveloped, with the exception maybe of Buddhist and Buddhist-derived approaches to depression and anxiety, such as mindfulness-based cognitive therapy or mindfulness-based stress reduction. Still, variable-bodied people are able to self-narrate meaning and hope through Buddhism. Buddhist modernist disabled writers are utilizing more and more the experience of variability for spiritual transformation, and hence offer pathways to variable Buddhist empowerment. So the time, I think, is ripe for socially engaged crip liberation of a Buddhist kind, and a fuller Buddhist theology of embodied variability. By utilizing a twofold Buddhist hermeneutics of preliminary and ultimate contexts, I argue for a Buddhist liberation theology and praxis of non-judgmental, demarginalized and dehegemonized celebratory approaches to bodily variability and neuroatypicality, in the few acknowledgement of the universal principle of samsaric conditionality and the individual expression of samsaric challenges. Oppressive body normalcy as regime of biopower can be successfully critiqued through Buddhist modernist social theory, which provides pathways for navigating variability-affirming anthroposcapes. To come to my conclusions, Buddhist realities and Buddhist utopias clash, and their battleground are real, historically defined and culturally refined, embodied experience of variance, marginalization, stigmatization, but also experiences of emancipation, transformation, and liberation. The human journey through the temporal and spatial landscapes of our embodied experiences manifests with primary parameters of identity and difference. Rather than being binary absolutes, the fundamental parameters of identitarian belonging form in protean, shifting ways with situations, context, time and space, always in orientation to an underlying prototype center, attracting the most enduring, extreme and recognizable examples. I use Lukathian prototype theory here and its distribution and its centers for psychosocial identitarians' recognition is hence paradoxically oriented at its almost impossible, hence extreme ideal. The closer to the center individuals perform their embodiment, the stronger is their participation in psychosocial power, or to take Lacan's psychoanalytical term of the fallos. I have elsewhere suggested to think of underlying power dynamics as aphalophobia, the fear of losing the individual channel societal power of the essentialized ideal center. Extending the aphalophobia principle, I maintain that the key struggle for inclusion and social justice lies exactly in the rethinking of the illusion of identitarian stabilities, or in other words, the ideal yet illusionary and random centers of belonging. The radical acceptance of human variability leads to the celebratory recognition of belonging as being the same, only different. Varyingly performed embodiment flowing from time and space and context and situation, inhabiting such variable anthroposcapes without center and margin restores the possibility of individual body performances without creating oppressive body normativities. Infusing the concept of variability and more broadly critical social theory, with the opportunities afforded by Buddhist post-modernist philosophies, I maintain that pathways appear for navigating variability-affirming anthroposcapes by relaxing the artificial boundaries of our anxious selfhood into the ravishing of ontological uncertainty and fluidity. We are able to perform compassion without essentialized self, solidarity without colonizing and hegemonizing, overpowering, and dehegemonized embodiment. We are same, only different. Thank you very much.